David, nice to have you on the podcast. Just quick introductions from ourselves. Do you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Arani. David Chernitzky, CEO of Armour Cybersecurity. We are here in Toronto, Canada, planning to have some fun. Thanks for joining to this podcast. Arani, maybe you introduce yourself
Perfect.
as
Thank you
well.
so much. This is Arani, Chief Strategy Officer at Armour Cyber. This will be first of many of the series we are going to do. Hopefully, the topic will be interesting and we keep you engaged.
I feel like in love. I have butterflies in my belly, and I'm not so young anymore, but it's definitely first one of many. So maybe to give a bit of background about who we are as Armour Cybersecurity. We are Canadian-based cybersecurity. We're providing full range of cyber defense services for organizations across multiple industries, anything from government, large enterprises, small and medium businesses. But it really doesn't matter. We're protecting today everyone in the same way, and we are quite different from many organizations in Canada. We're not Canadian. We're not operating only in Canada. We have clients in US, Guatemala, Ecuador, Israel, Slovenia, Belize. Most probably I can go on.
We can
but you
go
get
on
it.
that. Yes.
Anywhere around the globe. So, and we're going and educating today executives and the business leaders about very different topics that in our practice we learned that their big impact and the most importance of proactively managing your business risk associated with cyber threats. And today we are going to talk about supply chain risk management. And Arani, maybe if you can explain to our listeners and viewers what is supply chain risk management.
Absolutely. So think of supply chain as your third parties, right? From an organization context, you're dealing with vendors, you're dealing with software, you're dealing with service contractors. Anybody who is not a full-time in the organization will be considered third party. Now, topic of the day again, supply chain security. Why is it necessary? We're going to be talking about it for a while now, but think about it this way, right? So if a vendor gets hacked, if a supply chain component, right, a software gets hacked, a vendor gets hacked, and they introduce this vulnerability in your organization, you're at risk, right? While organizations are very good at protecting themselves, their employees, you are doing a lot for your employees. You have policies in place. You have security awareness training going on. You're testing them for phishing and how they fall for it or not. But when it comes to third parties, right, anybody outside the organization introducing a threat inside, I think that's where we see a lot of lacking, right, from a program perspective, right. We have seen the regulatory landscape change a bit as well, right. We have seen SEC, for example, in US take a very, very hard stance at supply chain risk. Canadian regulators are coming up as well with that. So it's definitely a topic of interest, right? We are getting a lot of calls from our clients where we are dealing with how do you deal with third-party risk, right? So David, maybe you can talk about some examples of recent hacks that happened in third parties.
Yeah, and it's fascinating work because actually many examples that we heard in recent years of hacks, for example, Kaseya is a third party that a lot of IT companies using to manage their clients with this software. Eventually, attackers have a huge interest in those type of softwares because once you get into one company, you're able to access to multiple clients at one shot.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what happened. And there is a bunch of other examples, but I want for a second to zoom out and give some example actually from this morning. One of the clients that we periodically doing certain type of service and we touch base after 2 years to see how they're doing and how things are going. The reality today that a velocity of evolution of type of threats that you see out there is enormous, especially with the introduction of AI and the attackers leveraging those tools. And it was fascinating to see the client that we spoke 2 years ago. We gave them a list of recommendations. They've been so proud that we fixed that, this, and that. Fantastic. But they're they're good for 2 years ago, but
Exactly.
the reality today is different. And we spoke about supplier risk management. They're even not aware of that. And I think Kaseya is just one of the IT suppliers example. But if you look at thinking about your organization, there is very famous example that one of the banks CEO office admin was sending flowers to a CEO wife every year. Now, if you think about it, it's the most discreet information that you want to keep too close to your chest, but small flower shop that has zero security led to the fact that eventually attackers leverage to exploit it to their benefit by getting through small flower shop to the top guy in an organization. How do you protect your assets? And people executives, it's your assets. How do you protect it? And again, we can go with a lot of examples, but in this interconnected world, that everything hyper-connected, there is no organization that has one supplier or two.
Exactly.
The bigger you go, the more suppliers you go. Organization of 10,000 people usually have 500, 600 suppliers. How do you protect those?
And something to add to it, right? So the definition of third parties, right? We traditionally saw them as like the vendor example that you give, a vendor giving a service to the company. I think another famous case from a few years back, which was SolarWinds, right? Changed the definition of supply chain risk a bit, right? So no longer, because again, the prominence of that case, right? No longer it was just a third party vendor or a service vendor, but a software, right? That the organization was using, like the Kasai example as well, right? That was treated as a potential area of coming in. Attackers know, like you said, that they can go one to many, right, from that relationship. I think with SolarWinds case, with Kaseya case, right, there were backdoors, and still we see that today, right? When open source software, we're seeing a lot of backdoors come in, right? And they have been there for ages. It's not a new thing. They've been there for ages. It's dormant. It's not being used till the day it's being used, right? And look, as much case studies, as many numbers and as many statistics we can give, the reality is, the definition of an organization is now boundaryless. Like you're saying, it's perimeterless, right? The perimeter has dissolved, right? Now we see third parties in terms of even code that your developers are writing, libraries that your people are using, the flower shop, right? In this example that they were using, they are all considered as legitimate ways in to an organization. You don't have to hack a server to go in. You can just hack the vendor.
Exactly, and maybe we gave some big examples. If we can go to smaller examples, a couple of years back, we had a client in manufacturing sector that they had a very small supplier here, and eventually a supplier needed to be paid, but supplier was compromised. And eventually a lot of money went to third party. So this client realizing it was way too late after they realized that money actually is gone. Cybersecurity is about how you can manage your business risk, and business eventually risk always associated with how do you protect your revenue, how do you protect your ability to operate. So if you lost your revenue and you cannot, you can sue this small guy till tomorrow.
But exactly. It doesn't solve anything at the end.
It doesn't go well. Another example, we do a lot of business in Latin America, and we see significant gaps there on the market. And a lot of time, if you go into manufacturing space, you have operational technologies that are controlled by third
parties.
The amount of time that people assuming that they're dealing with well-protected company and just let them access to your environment is phenomenal. And eventually it's enough for attackers enough to get to one crack
in the organization.
Exactly, in a manufacturing supplier. Then they get into their network, and usually it's flat.
It's flat, and it goes from there. Exactly.
No separation between IT or it's a game over.
Exactly.
It's effectively game over. So, I hope we managed to explain how complex this topic and how broad and deep. But Arani, maybe if you can try to structure a bit the discussion.
Yeah.
How you can identify
Absolutely.
vulnerabilities in
Yeah.
the supply chain, and how do you
Yeah.
how organizations can start building their
It-
resilience.
let's do that, right? Let's do that. So lot of times, so let's structure this first, right? So a vendor, when you establish a relationship with a vendor, there is an onboarding process, right? So you go out, you select a number of different options you have, right? And then you select, look, this is the vendor that we want to work with. Once you enter a contract with the vendor, and then you have the service on, there's a service delivery period that's there. And look, if it's, again, depends on supplier to suppliers, but at some point there'll be an offboarding. So third party risk management or supply chain risk management can be broadly broken down into these three categories, right? You have the onboarding, you have a life cycle of the vendor, in the organization, and then there's offboarding. Now, this onboarding period is very important, right? This is when you are selecting who you will do business with for the rest of their lifetime of the contract, right? So there are various mechanisms that we use to ensure that they have the right security practices and controls. So for example, like you might have heard of something known as a SOC 2 report. It's a pretty well-known report. It's a assurance that is provided based on frameworks set out by AICPA organization. But they are expected, vendors are today expected to actually provide that report before they can enter a relationship with a big organization. We have a lot of clients where we are doing business with, again, startups. In order for the startup to do business with a large bank, they will need to have a certain level of assurance done, a third-party risk assessment performed in order to enter that contract, right? So I think that trend, we are seeing a lot of trends happening in that onboarding space where clients and where organizations are asking their vendors, right, to have a minimum level, and this is where we say the minimum level of security controls before you can do a business, right? And if you go 5-6 years back, I think the large banks were enforcing it, right? But if you look at majority of the organizations, they were not, right? So it's a good trend, right? That today they are actually looking at these controls.
Especially big guys, actually.
Oh yes.
They leading the way because they learned it, unfortunately, many times.
The hard way.
The hard way.
Yeah.
The hard way. And banks is one example, but we also see in a aerospace industry. You are a small machine shop that you're working for bigger guys that building
building parts for a bigger machinery.
Will not go to specific things, but building parts for this or that very well-known manufacturer, you have to adhere to certain standard. Otherwise, you cannot do business. It's a business enabler.
It's a business.
It's not a business expenditure anymore.
Yeah.
Same with like we have a client that they're providing ingredients for one of the biggest beverages companies. Unless you comply with certain standard, you cannot play the game. It's your entry ticket for work with the bigger guys. And I think there is, of course, there is a structure to that. And Arani, maybe you can talk a bit like how it happens today.
Yeah.
In reality, like, and what are the ways?
We'll talk with some examples. We'll give some examples for the viewers, right? So let's take this example, right? So and we'll give probably two. So this example of the client who is a manufacturer of a certain ingredient for beverage companies, right? Before they could do business with the beverage company, they were provided with a very stringent contract, which had outlines anything from vulnerability scan, pen test to incident response, SOC, etc. Anything and everything that you can think on, those were covered, right? Now, in order to show compliance, right, there needs to be a preparedness for that. This organization, again, we help them prepare towards it. We put together, the policies, their processes of how they can demonstrate security, right, to their customers, to their prospects. Again, I use the word demonstrate security because that's an important aspect that we are seeing today, right? We are seeing, increasing, the usage of this term trust, right? In a vendor and in a supply chain, you need to have a certain trust that they are doing the right things, as to protect the security of the organization and security of the business. Because again, that's the person you are doing business with. Something happens to them, a breach happens because of that. The parent business is at risk. Right. So in reality, I think one of the things that we have helped clients do with examples is, we have provided them how they can demonstrate security, right, to their prospects, to their clients going forward, right? The other example, now looking
on a continuous basis.
on a continuous
On a
basis,
continuous
basis.
It's not, I always comparing it to treadmill. It's not just you showed one time you can run. You
Yeah.
need to show that you actually can run for a marathon.
Yeah.
As long as you are engaged. In
Yeah,
this
that example felt very personal, David. Like, was that I don't know if it was meant for me, but that example felt very personal.
There is a bit of personal joke goes in, but one of the goals of Arani, he's going to hit certain pace in running.
Well, now we said it. Now we said it live. Now I'm on the hook.
Now we said it live.
Exactly. But the other example, David, like another client, right, where we have gone from the other end, right? So we have actually created this supply risk program, right? And we are assessing their vendors. And again, the keyword that you said, continuous basis, is very important. 5 years again, before, right? And I use this example a lot of times. It used to be point in time assessment. So again, in that life cycle of the contract of onboarding, service delivery, offboarding, you assess them once and then it was forgotten, right? The vendor was assessed once during the onboarding and nobody looked at them after. But now with things like, for example, breach notification, it's coming in.
Maybe Arani, like just in this context, think about you assess someone that he's fine today.
Yeah.
Does it mean he will not be breached tomorrow or 2 weeks from now?
Especially current landscape, the current landscape, right? Because you can never, point in time controls only show you that, you're good at that point of time, right? So now the trend has become, and this is what we're doing for this particular client, is we are continuously monitoring all their vendors, right? For their security posture, right? Now that means, using certain platforms, certain tools. Again, we're not going into the platform details tools, but there are certain platforms that are available that actually helps you continuously monitor a vendor's cybersecurity posture. It's almost like a credit rating system for the vendor, but for the security. It's like their credit score for the security, right? Now, based on that, we can also get into deep dive audits. So, for example, if
What name of one of the platforms?
did we now? They're not the sponsors yet, so it's all is good. They're not the sponsors yet.
So maybe we'll not repeat.
Exactly. But with the vendors, right, with those credit scores, right, what they can do is, they know that, if the score falls from a X to a Y, there is a compelling event, right? Might be they got breached, might be their data got exposed, right? But that gives enough intel, right, to the that gives enough intel to the parent organization, right, to go in and audit the vendor a bit more in depth, right? Now there are a lot of examples like this. Again, the whole purpose is move away from point in time assessments, ensure that there's a structured way you're assessing your vendors, right? But then keep on continuously assessing them, right?
It's absolutely required, and maybe let us share another aspect that let's say you have 500 vendors, and till today, and many organizations that we seen in the recent years, the way how it works, like Arani explained, there is 3 steps in the process. So onboarding, it was usually Excel, one of the best tools by far that we invented.
Excel is the best password manager as well as the best assessment tool. Like that's how it rolls.
Of course,
that's
we're joking, but it's this is why we on the podcast today, so we can have a bit of fun. But at the end of the day, we seen this massive Excel sent out to people.
Exactly.
You're getting and think once you're interacting with people, it's usually you send out the Excel.
Yeah.
You wait for 1 week because the guy is on vacation.
Yeah.
He's coming back. He's not clear. He's filling it out partially. Then you send it again. Think about your 500 of those. You filled out 500 of those. Answers coming back, and then you need to do it again and again and again. It's a assessment task. It's a lot of work. And what from our experience, we're talking to a lot of vendors that actually working on automating this process. Many times they said they did the research, and people what they do in these Excels. I don't want to use word lie, but they're not accurate.
Let's say not accurate. Let's just keep it not accurate
in the responses. So eventually it creates incredible overhead. It's a extremely manual labor intense process, and it's not effective. So going to tools that eventually, once you have well-defined process that you can automate it. Eventually, you can automate these questionnaires, collection of data. You can implement workflow.
Yeah.
You can, and then there are systems on the market that actually testing against what was answered in Excel
Correct.
versus the reality. It eliminates these discrepancies sometimes in the
To the best possible extent, right? You can never know, but to the best possible extent. But let's also, address another underlying issue, a debate that is happening in the industry right now. We work with a lot of startups, right? And again, organizations on a smaller scale. Look, modern startups, they're cloud first, right? They don't have a data center, right? They are their entire application, their entire stack is remote workforce as well as on cloud, right? But oftentimes these questionnaires, these Excels that we talked about, and previous other versions as well, right? They are still archaic, right? They are still asking them, hey, how do you do a physical security of the data center, right? While they don't actually have a data center, right? So I think one of the other trend that we have started seeing is these sort of questionnaires needs modernization, right? You can no longer ask the same questions to a SaaS vendor who doesn't operate out of that data center, right? So and this is again a frustration on the other end as well, to third parties as well, because a lot of times we see supplier risk assessors, right, who are sitting on the other end. They are asking questions which are not relevant, right? So I think one of the key important thing is, again, the person who is reviewing that Excel or reviewing platforms, right? They need to understand the context that this vendor is coming from, right? It's not a one size fits all, right? Yeah. One thing that we have tried to do with our programs and processes for our clients, we make sure that we tailor it, right, as to the type of vendors that you're dealing with. Otherwise, it gets a frustrating experience both from the auditee as well as the auditor.
Taylor, and it's ask it in context of this
Exactly.
vendor of this industry and in context of its size. Sometimes we see these mega questions that they're trying to ask from small company. What do you expect them to answer?
Exactly. And they may not have the budget and the resources to do a SOC 2 engagement at that point of time. Is it necessary on day one? What we would suggest, right? Again, there is a aspect of assurance and compliance, but what we would suggest is, focus more on true security of the vendor, truly understand how they're going to service your business, and to the possible extent, right, review and audit what are the security controls of how they're going to protect the data. Do you really care if they have a policy written down or not, right? Versus whether they actually practice this policy, right? In reality.
Which brings us to fantastic point. Being secure and being compliant many times doesn't imply the same. It's many times I like to use this Venn diagram. It's overlapping, but the question, how much of overlap you want to have, and we've seen bigly responses from vendors that if you read it like the way they replied it, most
it's
probably
lawyered.
doing
It's a lawyered up response.
Exactly, lawyered up response. But and we hope, like you're saying, it needs to be practical and tailored for. You need to care about security and the people practicing, organizations that you work with, really practicing. That Arani, can you talk about a bit about regulation and standards in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a catch-up game now, right? There are a few regulations. Again, it depends on the North American market and which space we actually talk about. They are increasingly, again, regulators, both from an actual regulatory body as well as standards organizations. They are giving extreme focus on third-party security, right? Again, previously it was not seen to this extent, but now a quick example in Canadian context, right? OSFI, you might have heard about the organization. They have come up with specific requirement for third parties and their security controls, right? Was this part of their programs before? Absolutely, right? But now they have honed in and focused specifically on this because they know this is a risk. In the last administration at White House, they actually came up with certain directives that talked about software supply chain risk, right? Again, as you said, third party is no longer this one person or one company servicing you. It also extends now to the software that you're using and how secure the software is, right? So there are regulations. We see the trend in the right direction. And look, fortunate or unfortunate, as you said, compliance and cyber is two different things, but regulations and standards have always been a key driver for a lot of these programs. So it's definitely a welcome change to see regulators and standards body take an interest in this topic and driving it top down, right? But at the same time, when by the time it trickles down to the to the mass and the enforcement is there, right? It's a bit too late, right?
Yeah.
So while there might be standards now coming up, right, the actual enforcement is extremely difficult, right? Like look, we are talking about the North American context here. If we go Latam, if we go any other geographic regions where we do business, again the regulations are yet to catch up there, right? Although you have massive amount of supply chain risks coming out there, like you have so many companies getting hacked who are more third parties, who are famous third parties for a lot of other big clients. But again, it's a catch up game for a lot of these regulators and standards bodies.
Yeah, it's definitely just the beginning of
Yeah.
the era that will be coming.
Yeah.
And maybe just to go back to the tools and automation, I think it's super important once you automate the process, onboarding process, and correlate it not just between Excel and the writer's mind, because we know Excel can hold any data that
Yeah.
you put it. It will still Excel, but if you automate information gathering, like basically what is the supplier reports, and then on continuous basis monitoring what's going on. And actually, the idea is to create a capability that if there is a breach, you see vulnerabilities plague the environment, and on many of those tools actually collecting information from dark web. If there is spike in mentions in dark web that information actually is for sale, you proactively can take an action. You can cut access of this supplier to your environment. This is the intent. You want to be secure, right? And
that's what we see as an example as well, right? Like some of the examples, we obviously talked about not naming the clients, but we have seen situations where it's not a full ransomware or a full data breach, but it's as cases like business email compromise, where a threat actor has access to the business emails, right? The other side, the client of the vendor, because the vendor had a business email compromise, they actually cut off and started blocking all the emails to the client, right? So they are taking steps today, like you said, cut off access in the remotest moment. They will actually think about or know that there is a breach in the vendor, right? So it's a very serious problem, because again, when you cut off email access, think about this organization, this vendor and the client can't communicate. Their business is stopped, right? They're not able to communicate over email anymore, right? And the whole reason is a business mail compromise. It's not even in a full ransomware scenario.
Yeah, but I think being cautious than sorry.
Absolutely.
I think it's absolutely right approach. And at the end of the day, what we spoke a few years back to one of the vendors in this space, and they did actually quite interesting research that they're saying if you monitor your vendor posture, and external posture is the easiest one to measure, right? And if you see very low security maturity score for this posture, there is an extremely strong correlation that inside this vendor will be sloppy as well.
Yeah.
And like we discussed, the modern perimeter
Exactly.
is like no perimeter.
Exactly.
Almost no perimeter. So if inside there have sloppy stance, most probably it will be easy walking target for attackers.
And that's how they'll get breached. They'll get breached from outside, right? So
eventually, would you like to work with vendor like that?
Exactly.
Would you let them to connect to your environment remote to support this machine? And if they're breached, maybe all your environment.
More importantly, would you trust them with your data, right? That's the topic of the hour. That's the keyword of the hour. It's trust, right? Whether they can be trusted with that sort of critical data. Again, depends on what data you put, but can you be trusted with that sort of critical data? Maybe David, let's talk about some trends, right, in the industry, right? So again, we talked about the supply chain risk. We talked about what has been going on, how we can structure this sort of programs, how we have been dealing with our clients around these areas. Maybe what do you see as a future of these sort of supply chain risk? What are the key things that you are seeing in the industry? Again, how are the vendors evolving? How are they proactively addressing the cyber risks?
So maybe let's tackle it from the famous IBM people, process, technology, and what I see in the market today, that more and more organizations are actually realizing that it's not something that left only for big guys. Be you government, large bank, small manufacturer, medium-sized law firm, you have to deal with your vendor security.
Yeah.
So people need to realize that it needs to be part of any organization's cyber defense strategy. This is number one. Number two, I think what we see, it's more sharing in the industry. And eventually people talk about it.
Exactly.
One of the best ways to learn is to learn from other people's mistakes. Yeah. It's not to learn from your hard mistakes, but from other people's mistakes. And people are sharing their experiences, and there is a very structured way, and it's not necessarily very expensive. It can be done extremely cost effective.
Yeah.
It depends on your size. Again, if you have 9,000 vendors, you can, we heard examples that departments of 17, 18 people that been dealing with third-party risk, this proper automation can go down to 5.
Yeah.
For this type size of organization. So again, embracing the knowledge in the industry, embracing the technology, I think introduces a lot of improvement. And of course, I was trying not to say AI even once, but I think AI will give a lot of innovation to that space as well, because at the end of the day, AI is a productivity tool.
Correct.
And it will be harnessed for improving this area. And Arani, if you have anything else to
maybe one more point to add on that, right? You mentioned a keyword, sharing, right? One trend that we are seeing in the industry come up now is sharing of threat intelligence and sharing the vendor risk data, right? So think about, strategic vendors, strategic supply chain areas, right? That actually caters to a large variety of industry, right? Think of this one software that everybody uses, right? Now, their security posture will be the same as they do for the organization, right? So we have seen a lot of the trend coming up where they're, as a group or as a collective, as an industry, they're sharing threat intel and threat information regarding certain vendors, right? And vendors, again, who don't fall in a specific category or a specific score, unfortunately, they're not doing business in that industry, right? So it's sharing.
They're switching industries.
There's pivoting, right? But it's an important problem to have.
I think they call it passport, right? Like they call your security posture passport. So eventually,
different vendors have different terms, but like something of that sort. Yeah,
something of this sort.
It's basically, again, going back to the point of demonstration, right? How are you able to demonstrate your cybersecurity posture so that the people who are buying from you, they actually can have that trust in you, right? So it's very important, no matter how much policy you have, how are you demonstrating cybersecurity to your prospects and clients and customers? All right, awesome.
Now go.
Awesome. So now that we have talked about supply chain risk, cybersecurity for third parties, hopefully the intention was not to scare everyone out there. The intention was to educate and talk about this important topic of third-party risk and third-party risk management. Let's talk about few ways where Armour Cybersecurity can help our prospects and customers. David, if you want to go start
Sure.
with some of the services that we do in this space.
So I think what we managed to demonstrate that it's extremely broad, and there is a lot of aspects to the third-party risk management domain, and of course, as I hope we didn't scare anyone, but to make it effective, there is a certain structured approaches how we help clients today to define what are the objectives. Based on that, we help them to structure a program where you have a very very defined steps. Where do you start? How do you define your processes? How do you define your KPIs, gating criteria? What technology can fit? There is a lot of technology out there. And of course, another aspect for any change in organization, I think it's the biggest challenge today that many times is not addressed properly, organizational change management.
Yeah.
How do you drive it inside of your organization? How do you drive it with your clients that will have, with your vendors, I apologize, that will have to comply with this new program. So we have multiple clients with that, and I think the easiest way will be, if you don't know where to start, give us a shout. We're happy to come to see you in person, to jump on a call, to give an advice, no strings attached. And if we can help beyond that, we'll be happy to do so.
Absolutely. And I think just adding to what David, you said, like, again, you have to start somewhere, right? I know there are a lot of clients out there, a lot of prospects out there that are getting calls that it's literally it's a blocker for revenue, it's a blocker for their business, because they're not able to demonstrate their cybersecurity posture, right, to to their clients, right? It's a legitimate business blocker that we are seeing. So ultimately, again, we can help you structure it in a way, we can help you demonstrate this security, like your posture, no matter where you are in the journey. Again, it's a journey, it's not going to stop by on day one. We can help you demonstrate that to your clients, to your customers, and help you get more business at the end, right? So again, call us for any of these concerns that you have.
Arani, thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking about this topic, and it's the first one of many more to come. And we'll see you in the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David.